But they all exploded without harming our submarines. The Tribune published that information. The Japanese reset the charges, and the next week sunk 10 of our submarines. I wonder if the New York Times, or in this case the Tribune, should be the one to judge what to publish or not. I want to have a discussion of it. But let's assume for a moment you say, well, look, the editor of the New York Times and the Washington Post, these are sensible people. They will not harm the United States unduly. You know, sometimes they make a mistake when they publish, for instance, we have a mall in the headquarters of the Al-Qaeda in Yemen, or that we learned how to listen to nuclear deliberations in North Korea. Maybe they crossed the line there. But you know, as the question is, who qualifies as an editor? It turns out anybody who has a blog is an editor. Ladies and gentlemen, that really means that we do no longer have national secrets because anything can be published.
Professor, I wanted to just interrupt you because we have limited time here and I want to get some additional points here. As I pointed out at the very beginning, the healthcare industry has been a victim of attacks, has had retail and so on and so forth. I want to talk a little bit about the balance between technology and human behavior. We find that today humans we are wearing Fitbits, health devices, GPS devices in our pockets. We readily swipe our credit cards. We often are asked to give our Social Security numbers for loans. Why is there, so technology enables a lot of that, but why is the human behavior such that we're not pushing back when we hear about identity theft is becoming rampant? Social Security numbers are being stolen and fraudulent tax returns are being filed in other people's names. So, well, go ahead.
Let me just jump in. I mean, first of all, it's wonderful to be on a panel with Amitai. We've debated these issues, I think, since before the founding of EPIC. But also, to be clear, our book is not a strong privacy is important book. Our book is actually about emerging challenges and issues, and we're really looking at it from a variety of different perspectives, and I think he would appreciate many of those. But coming to your question, and also in our book, is the wonderful contribution of Alessandro Acquisti, who's an economist at Carnegie Mellon University, and he's specialized in a field called behavioral economics. And what Alessandro is interested in is the answer to your question. Why is it that people don't do more to protect their privacy? Why don't they spend more time checking their privacy settings or the advertisers who are following them online? And the short answer is it's not rational. It's not sensible. In other words, if you've taken some time, and this is an example involving Facebook, to set your privacy settings so that you have limited disclosure of your personal information, and many people did this, and then Facebook goes in and changes your settings, makes your information more widely available, and then says to you, but if you really care about your privacy, of course you'll go back in and change it back to your original privacy settings. We actually brought this complaint to the Federal Trade Commission. The experience of most users, I think, will understandably be, what's the point? Why are you asking me to do this if you're not going to respect my decisions? So in thinking about privacy, I think we have to move from the micro to the macro. We have to stop asking the question, you know, why is it that people don't push back, to the question of why is it that when people try to push back, they meet such resistance? Because that turns out to be a much more interesting question and helps explain, for example, why data flows so readily from individuals to organizations, even when they're not aware of it or haven't made that explicit choice.
And Jim, is that what you have found also when you researched your book and subsequently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are legions of young hackers and builders who are trying to make better stuff. I happen to have lunch with one of them, a young man I admired a great deal, and I said, you know, I got one of these things, these fit things, you know. I wanted to find out like how much I was sleeping and how much I was walking, and that's, if I'm not sleeping enough and I'm not walking enough. How about that? I knew that beforehand. But he said, oh yeah, I was one of the founders of the company that built that thing. Do you know that we collect 500 millennia of sleep data every night? I said, you're collecting my sleep data every night? I mean, I was pretty shocked about that. But I wondered if I could jump over to some of the things, and completely out of my depth, I have to say.
I just want to say we have about 5 more minutes until we are taking audience.
So I'll be so underwater in the next 30 seconds. Amitai was talking about these interesting divergent issues, divergent pressures, right? We want to protect ourselves from, let's say, somebody who might have been in ISIS territory and has come back from there, and who are they talking to and all that stuff. I have no problem with the government having a process for doing that stuff. But what Snowden and the other revelations of the era showed was that there was no meaningful process. The Fourth Amendment, which you says, which you rightly point out is a dialogue, right? There shall not be searches, but they shall not be unreasonable. So there has to be a determination of reasonability. Where has that happened in this age? It has dissolved. And I think, so when people seem to be screeching about privacy, they're screeching because there's no wizard who's controlling the curtain at all. And that, I think, is the real alarming piece of what has come out over the last several years to me.
It's not up to a wizard, it's up to us. That's what they call democracy. So I don't want some public intellectual or professor of sociology sitting on the campus and making those decisions. That's why we write these books, to feed into a dialogue. And given more time, I would show that when we have these dialogues, rather than this polarization and screaming, very often new shared understandings do arise, and we reach a new consensus. We did it about the environment. We're doing it now about gay marriages. We did it about black and white. We did it about men and women. So we need this conversation to balance. But since I know we're about to run out of time, I just want to add one other completely different point. Going back to the question, why we are not spending more time on dealing with technology. So one half of my book, The New Normal, asks the question of what is important, what makes for a meaningful life, and what makes for a good life. And the answer we used to give to each other, though it's not polite to say it in mixed company, is affluence. And so the other day gave a TED talk, and I start by saying, ladies and gentlemen, do you need an inflatable Santa Claus on your rooftops? And everybody chuckled. And then I said, do you need plastic pelicans on your front lawn? And people had a good little laugh. And then I said, do you need a flat TV? And I lost my audience. And I said, how about an S5 phone? And they asked me to leave. I'm exaggerating. But the point I'm trying to make, we become so enamored with the notion that the more objects we control and the more affluence we have, that's the definition of good life. It's not going to happen. We face lasting economic challenges, which will not allow us what we did in the past, give every generation a more affluent life than the last one. And even if we could, we shouldn't, because a lot of people didn't get the basics, and because it turns out that after a certain level of income, additional income really does not buy you contentment. And so the question I'm asking, the new normal is what will make for a more meaningful life. And in the sentence, Abraham Maslow gave her the answer. Once you have your basic needs satisfied, not before. I'm not telling the poor should enjoy their poverty. I'm saying once you're all brought up to a level where our basic needs are well stated, then to continue to treat objects as the way to express our affection, to gain prestige. That's where becomes consumerism an obsession and a form of psychological pathology. And so to get to this, we need to liberate ourselves from our addiction to ever more goods, to make room for public dialogue, which will lead us to how to limit intrusion on our privacy.
Thank you. And with that, what I'd like, anybody that has a question, comment, idea, please line up at the microphone.
Good afternoon. My question's for Mr. Rotenberg. You talk about how companies should provide the option or the knowledge of what they're doing through data. What about I guess I would say their devil's advocate argument that when you click the terms of service that most people don't read at all, that's 55 pages of 2-point font, you kind of agreeing to that, and when given the option anyway, we pick the free thing that costs, the thing that costs nothing, but we give a little privacy. Like I use Google Docs instead of Word, I use Google Maps instead of paying for a map function, and all of these free things that make my life infinitely easier. The price that I am paying is a little bit of, Google knows how I live my life in every way.
Yeah. Well, it's an excellent question. I mean, first of all, you point to the fact that most privacy policies on websites, those terms and conditions don't actually provide privacy protection. It's a form of a waiver, disclaimer. The company is saying to you, if you visit our website or do business with us, this is what we'll do with your personal data. And so by visiting the site or clicking on the policy, you've accepted those terms and have lost any claims you might otherwise make. So I already see that problem as something that needs to change. I don't think companies should routinely disclaim their responsibility to protect your privacy. Someone said earlier, I think it was you, Bruce, that healthcare companies and banks and others have been subject to, big hacks over the last several years. Well, it's actually their customers and clients who have been subject to those computer crimes, because it's their data, their credit card information, their social security numbers that become available to criminals. And that's your information that the companies obtain from you and then try to disclaim. Now that goes into part two, which is what is the real cost to you? And I would say it's actually very difficult for you to assess. One of the things about the internet-based economy is you have none of the price mechanisms we understand so well. I mean, if you walk into a store and you see a jacket that you like, and one is $70 and one is $130, you pause for a moment, try to figure out, is it worth paying the extra $60? And we're all, I would say, pretty smart consumers. Not because we're trying to buy a lot of stuff, it's because we have limited resources and we're trying to figure out how to use those resources. We understand price, but we don't understand at all what happens in the online economy when we make those decisions. And companies are giving you free stuff, by the way, because they're trying to drive out their competitors who may actually have a better product or service to offer you if they can survive. But if they're forced out by a big company that for a period of time is able to give you stuff for free and keep you with them, that competition, that innovation never occurs. So I think we need to begin to think about these issues from a much bigger sort of social, political perspective. Many people have the experience you do, and they wonder, what's the real consequence? And as I said, our book, tries to promote that discussion.
Just to add one more thing to that, we are so used to think about the government and the private sector. For some people, the government is evil and the private sector is wonderful. Some people think the government needs to regulate the private sector more, but both sides agree, liberal and conservatives. They are two very different worlds. Well, if you look at what those companies do who collect or suck in all this information, at night they sell it to the government. So if the FBI would cap...
Are you agreeing with me? I can't tell.
I'm shocked. But that is not fair. You have been doing this too often. You know better.
We've agreed before.
No. What I'm saying is it's a very serious situation here, because if the FBI would keep a dossier on 200 million